So calf nutrition is the final area of opportunity that I think we have in calf health management. Just to kind of highlight some of the research that's been done in terms of evaluating nutrition in the pre-wean period, a higher nutritional plan has been associated with a reduced level of diarrhea, improved recovery from diarrhea, higher average daily gain, higher feed efficiency, reduced age at sexual maturity, reduced age at first calving, higher first lactation milk yield. So pretty substantial benefits when we provide a higher nutritional plan in the pre-wean period. So if you think about what that nutritional plan means, it's about anywhere between 8 to 12 liters of milk per day that we can provide to see some of those benefits. If we again look at the National Dairy Study and look at, how common or what proportion of producers will feed 8 liters of milk a day or more, the average amount of milk or maximum amount of milk that's fed per day by an average dairy producer in Canada is about 8 liters, which is really a good news story. So 50% provide 8 liters or more, but we still have this small proportion that provide a traditional restricted feeding of less than 4 liters per day. So takeaway from that is that many producers are doing a really good job in ensuring that their nutrition is appropriate on their farm. How can we monitor nutrition? I don't think it has to be super fancy. If we're just looking at it from a herd level basis, using a body weight tape is totally appropriate way to monitor nutrition on that farm and ensure that our calves are achieving this high growth rate. And if you think about in terms of our targets for growth rate, anywhere above 850 grams per day in the pre-wean period is considered to be a decent target to achieve, and anything over 1 kilogram per day in the post-wean period can be considered to be a good target. And as you can see from this farm, things are going well, and we don't really need to make any nutritional changes. So if you have the data, you can have those informed discussions with your producers. Just to further highlight the importance of pre-wean nutrition, this is a study that was done a little while ago where they looked at milk production in the first 305 days in milk and looked at average daily gain between 10 and 65 days of life. And what they found was that for every 100 grams per day increase that you had in average daily gain, it led to an additional 150 kilograms of milk in their first lactation. So changes in nutrition can lead to huge economic benefits for the producers. So again, going back to that monitoring, you have the data, you can have informed discussions. You can see on particular farms, either if their growth rate declined to maybe a level like 600 grams per day, or if they're always at 600 grams per day, you can have that discussion about improving the volume of milk or changing how they're providing nutrition on their farm. So we think about when we're monitoring growth, again, having that information that we can go back and evaluate what their growth is. I think there are a couple key areas that we can focus on to improve their growth. The one is the amount of milk that they're providing. So in the pre-wean period, this is a majority of the nutrients that these calves are going to get. So we want to ensure that this is an appropriate nutritional source. So for volume of milk, again, a lot of those benefits are seen anywhere between 8 to 12 liters of milk that's consumed per day. If you might have some producers that are pushing back and saying, well, that's too much. I might have calves that they don't naturally drink that much, or they might get diarrhea. This is a study that was done nearly 18 years ago where they looked at feeding calves totally ad libitum. And you can see that, calves will normally consume over 10 liters of milk per day. So I think it is pretty natural for these calves to consume a high volume of milk. If we look at feeding frequency, ideally you want to keep meals so that they're less than 4.5 liters per day or per feeding. That'll be ideal to really reduce abomasal damage, milk overflow into the rumen, any ruminal acidosis, and challenges with digestion that might occur. So that might be a barrier for some producers that are feeding twice a day. Ideally, feeding 4 liters, twice a day will get you to those benefits. And they don't really make bottles that are more than 4 liters, so that'll be a challenge for them to feed more than 4.5 liters. But that's something to keep in mind to ensure that we're not feeding more than 4.5 liters at a single feeding. If we look at increasing feeding frequency, so increasing the feeding frequency from 2 to 3 times per day without actually changing the volume of milk, in the wintertime, it'll actually improve calf health and improve weight gain because we're keeping these calves warmer. We're providing them with an energy substrate. We're providing with a warm liquid, so that'll keep them warmer in the wintertime. However, there's really no change under thermal neutral conditions. So in the summertime, there's really no change, anywhere between 15 to 25 degrees Celsius. We have no change if we increase the feeding frequency. So it's really important in the wintertime. If we look at milk replacer, or waste milk, milk versus milk replacer, there's not a lot of studies that have evaluated the differences between the two. If we look at milk replacer, it has substantially higher levels of lactose, which can be difficult for some calves to digest and can lead to higher levels of osmolality. However, there's a trade-off there where if we're feeding milk replacer, we have lower risk of transmission of both Johne's and leukosis. Waste milk really should not be fed on farms. They have higher levels of bacteria. It contains antimicrobials, which can generate antimicrobial resistance. But probably the biggest reason why not to feed waste milk is the variable quality that we have. So we have some cows that are producing the waste milk because they're been treated with antimicrobials. So we might have one cow one day, we might have another cow the next day, and maybe that first cow disappears. So we're going to have huge fluctuations in the fat and the protein for these calves, which will lead to poor growth ultimately. We also want to make sure that these calves have good solid feed intake to ensure that they're going to wean properly and be able to adapt to a solid feed-based diet. How we can better prepare them for weaning is through pre-weaned housing. And there's some newer work that's showing that if we keep calves in group housing, we actually can improve their starter intake. So here's a study from a number of years ago where they looked at pair housing, so keeping calves together, comparing to single housing. And what they found was that if you keep calves paired, they'll actually start to consume starter faster and more frequently than calves that are housed individually. And a lot of that is related to when they're housed in pairs, they'll go and explore their environment a little bit more if they're housed in single housing. We also want to ensure that we're using a gradual weaning program so that we're weaning over a period of at least 2 weeks to ensure that we have good solid feed intake. And other best practices ensure that the calves are eating at least 1 kilogram of starter for 3 consecutive days. And this is another thing that we can monitor. So we can test it using a Precision Extra or just a BHBA monitor. And if they're consuming at least 0.2 millimoles per liter, if their blood BHBA is over 0.2 millimoles per liter, they've consumed at least 1 kilogram of starter for 3 consecutive days. Other best practice for weaning: have a minimum of 3 weeks on starter and ensure that they have ad libitum water because that will drive their dry matter intake. Other key things when we're seeing, reduced growth or poor growth on farms is we want to consider, the environment that they're in. In the wintertime, we need to increase, their feeding rate by 25% to ensure that we meet those additional maintenance requirements for those calves to stay warm. So we need to, increase the volume of milk or even increase the amount of solids in milk to ensure that we're meeting those increased energy demands to stay warm. The final thing, if we're seeing poor growth, is also to evaluate, the level of disease on the farm. If they have high levels of disease, we often can see challenges with reduced growth. So just some takeaways from that particular area of nutrition. We need to feed higher planes of nutrition to achieve benefits like having improved growth rates, reduced level of disease, and improved first lactation milk production. We can really easily monitor growth just by taking a simple body weight tape, body weight measurement, and ensuring that we're achieving at least 850 grams per day in the pre-wean period and about 1,000 grams per day in the post-wean period. If we're exploring why we're seeing poor levels of growth or maybe inconsistency in growth, it's important to look at the amount of milk that they're being provided, what source of milk they're given, exploring the environmental temperatures that the calves are dealing with, ensuring we have good solid feed intake, and also we have reduced levels of disease.